Flashbacks can also be really, really vivid. You might feel as though you're reliving it and having reactions within you like it's happening in current time. Some people, when they have flashbacks, might feel like they're seeing images. You might even be pulled in by other sensations like sounds or smells. You may feel bodily or somatic sensations that are similar to the trauma you experienced. This idea I hear from clients often. My heart is still racing when I see this person. I thought I was over it, but maybe I'm not over my narcissistic relationship. This is something I hear quite often. I'll be working with a client or group of clients who've done well, much more healed. Maybe they're even somewhat indifferent to the narcissist. They're living a fuller life. They no longer feel gaslighted. They don't feel silenced or invalidated. In some cases, people may have even moved on into new relationships, new careers, and they feel happy. And then, for some reason of bad luck, they run into their narcissist. It could be something like a coincidental sighting at a grocery store. It may be a necessary sighting, someplace like a family wedding. It may be that you see them at a work event, or I don't know, it might even be something as bizarre as that you're sitting in traffic at a red light and you turn around and they're in the car next to you. Just sheer coincidence. But no matter where it is, you see them and your heart starts to race. And it feels like your heart's in your throat. You may feel like you can't catch your breath. You feel sick to your stomach. You may feel dizzy. It's an awful feeling. The moment will pass, and maybe at that moment you're able to duck into a doorway and they don't even see you. You just see them. Or maybe they just keep walking past you, even if they do notice you. Your heart keeps racing, and then slowly you return back to normal. Then, though, psychologically, you start to feel upset and perhaps even angry with yourself. You're thinking, what the hell? I thought I was over this. I thought I was past this whole experience. And this isn't just about intimate relationships. This can even be family members, former bosses, old friends. It can be someone you went no contact with, but as a result, you just couldn't account for the random coincidence of possibly seeing them in an airport or a train station, or just simply walking across the street. You get frustrated thinking to yourself, I did all of this damn work and I'm still not over it? And you might start to feel hopeless. Well, I'm here to offer you a little reassurance. You're actually more over it than you think. But your sympathetic nervous system didn't read the memo. Your narcissist was a source of fear and confusion for years. Maybe in not all cases was it fear of violence, but in some cases I know it was. But just fear. You had fear of saying the wrong thing, fear that you would be invalidated, fear of being gaslighted, fear of being lied to, fear of being betrayed, fear of always feeling confused. These are relationships that are characterized by months, years, and lifetimes spent walking on eggshells. If you actually do feel you're out of the woods psychologically, you may very well be. The cognitive work of narcissistic abuse is a little bit easier. You're able to think reasonably and rationally, the usual stuff. You're able to manage expectations, engage in radical acceptance, and with time, you slowly see the pattern that it was, that it is, and it always would be, so you get it. But your sympathetic nervous system doesn't catch up so quick. The sympathetic nervous system is our fight, flight, freeze, or fawn system. It's that part of us that is mobilized at times of fear to get us to a place of safety. When we see or experience something frightening, the sympathetic nervous system starts. It doesn't stop and say, well, let's think a little bit about radical acceptance and all the rest of it. It sees and processes any kind of dangerous stimulus almost immediately. And the racing heart and the other physiological symptoms are part of that mobilization. It's your brain and body kind of doing what they're supposed to. And all of this involves a variety of brain structures, such as the insula, the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex. All of these are involved in the processing of fear. This is happening at a primitive level. Now, it can be really demoralizing when you have these strong sympathetic reactions because, as I said, many people think that their heart racing means that they're not over it. Don't worry. It's just a signal that this was once frightening. In some ways, when you run into your narcissist, it's sort of a combination of post-traumatic stress and a phobia. They're often not something to be afraid of anymore. Like, for example, when we think of phobias, a person afraid of dogs isn't just afraid of snarling and dangerous dogs, but they're sometimes even afraid of tiny little teacup dogs. The fear of dogs get generalized, and it's not rational. Your poor nervous system is just doing its job, but it generalizes, right? So I don't want you to perceive your racing heart as a signal that you have not healed. If you really have healed and are feeling more indifferent, the fact that you got out of one of these relationships is nothing short of heroic. Now, trauma researchers and trauma clinicians have great suggestions for how to manage these moments, these traumatically activating moments when they happen. In a classical example, trauma researchers often suggest connecting to your body so you can bring down the fear. So let's say you see your narcissist and your pulse starts skyrocketing. Find your pulse. Find it at your wrist. Find it like at your neck. Put your hand on your beating heart, okay? And count the beats. Just pay attention to your body. Count the beats, okay? What you're going to see is that now you're really connecting to your body, and in such a focused way that your heart rate actually comes down. It's something it's like sort of a mechanism of biofeedback. And at that point, instead of feeling like something is happening to you, you actually start connecting with your bodily response. And you might then sort of denature that fear response. It's very simple, but it's very accessible to do this. So if you do have that chance encounter with your narcissist, find a quiet spot, go to a restroom, a private room, someplace you might be able to tuck away and get a moment to connect with yourself and connect with your body. Like I said, just take that pulse. And before you know it, you might feel your body relax again. Basically, what you're doing is mindfully monitoring yourself, just turning inward and giving yourself a minute. It's a simple gesture of self-compassion. Let's face it, you never got any compassion from that narcissist in your life. You're still learning how to be compassionate to yourself, so you need to step up to the plate and be your own compassionate person. You need to learn that. And again, much like a phobia, just like with that little teacup dog, the fear of narcissists can generalize. People may find themselves having strong reactions to any new person who comes into their life that might also have a narcissistic personality style. They may meet people who are braggy and arrogant or difficult, entitled, antagonistic. And you might find that you have an almost disproportionate reaction to their grandstanding. Again, it makes sense. Fear responses generalize. At some level, all you can do is take this as a life lesson and a wake-up call to distance from this new, difficult person. I sometimes notice this happening in like public places. Like I'll be in a store or a business and a difficult, entitled person will come in and start yelling at a manager or a clerk. And at those times, personally, I actually find that my heart starts racing and I feel sick. I know my own personal history with this, so I understand why this happens to me at those times. And at those times, depending on the nature of the situation, I'll either leave the situation. I've been known to leave full grocery carts. I will leave, or I'll do that monitoring technique I just told you about, or somehow distract myself. I'll play a game on my phone. On those days, to the degree it is possible, I will find a moment then to recalibrate in other ways. Instead of viewing this as I'm a broken person because I can't stand watching people behave like entitled jerks, instead, this can be reframed, and I can take the stance of recognizing how my life history has shaped me in a way that these situations are hard for me to watch or be a part of. I am not going to pathologize myself because someone else is acting like a jerk. That's on the jerk, not me. We are so used to judging people who get angry or get destabilized when they see entitled, toxic people. Instead of wondering that, like judging the person who's being affected, We should wonder why we accept toxic behavior. Listen, some people might tell me I need to grow a thicker skin, to which I'd say, you know what? My skin is plenty thick, but these situations do affect me, and I'm okay with that. That's the acceptance piece, and I don't need anyone else to get on board with it. I'm okay with it. Now, so many people in narcissistic relationships remain afraid that they will be stuck forever in fear. These nervous system responses can be disempowered by connecting with them and understanding them. It can also be useful to talk about them, perhaps in your own therapy, in a support group, or with a trusted friend. I have worked with countless clients who have said that, honestly, just the mere sight, for example, of a red car that's the same kind of car that their former partner drove is enough for them to feel like they need to pull over for a minute and catch their breath. And you know what? That's okay. It doesn't mean you're damaged, it doesn't mean you're stuck, and it doesn't mean you're still in love. It means your nervous system learned long ago that this person was not good for you, and it learned to be afraid. Interestingly, your sympathetic nervous system figured it out a lot sooner than your mind did. Your nervous system was telling you to get out a long time ago. Even when you were in the relationship, your heart was racing. But your mind kept making up justifications. So your thinking, your mind, your rational brain was the last part to get it. And then once you got it, you got it. But your nervous system's more primitive, so it takes a minute. Your body and nervous system are actually on your side because they do want to keep you safe. Sometimes they try to keep you too safe. And so you need to create an alliance of brain, body, nervous system, heart, and soul. By doing that, it can help you heal and be kinder to yourself in your process of recovery and survival. I have to tell you, I remember years ago, and there was somebody who was particularly narcissistically cruel to me. And I was driving in a part of town where this person lives. And there was somebody who resembled this person to a T walking along the street. This was a relationship that's years in the past. I remember I felt like my heart was going to explode and it was at my throat. I was in this sort of odd intersection where I could pull into a parking lot. And I was actually with other people, but I was the driver. And I remember almost like I was going to get myself into an accident because I was so trying to study the face of that person, trying to determine if it was that person. And it would be irrelevant because it was a busy street, it was a busy intersection. This person wouldn't have seen me. Now, I think I actually might have been driving a different car than I was at the time. And so I remember pulling over and the people in the car like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I made up some silly excuse about how I didn't know the direction, so I just needed to check something. They kind of got exasperated with me. But I honestly thought my heart was going to explode out of my chest. Because of the nature of the intersection, I was able to get a better look at this person. It wasn't the same person. But I remember one of my initial reactions was anger. I'm like, girl, seriously? This is still bothering you after all these years? And in that moment, I reflected on other professional relationships, you name it, where I've run into those people in conventions, and my relationship with them was 20 years ago that we'd have the problem in our professional relationship. And I'd see them in a convention hall, and like a kid in high school being bullied, I'd turn around and try to walk another direction. Fight, flight, freeze, or as Pete Walker brilliantly says, fawn. Like either you're going to go and praise them, or you're going to get the heck out of Dodge, or freeze and hope that the earth opens up and takes you in. But here's the bottom line. I'll never forget that day, and ever since, whenever I talk with clients, and this has happened to me many times, I hear them because they always think, I'm losing my mind. Please don't tell me I'm still in love with this person. Oh, well, hell no. You're not in love with this person. But your nervous system is just doing its job and saying, please, sweetie, I need to keep you safe. Danger, danger, danger. It's a different kind of danger. You know you're over it. And I did. I was like, I honestly don't care what happens to this person. But I actually, in some ways, pat my nervous system on the back and said, thanks for keeping me safe. My heart rate returned. My passengers were still a little confused. And I'm like, oh, now I know the right way. And I was perfectly fine once the car started driving you again. I find myself thinking back to my recent narcissistic relationship that ended. Am I having flashbacks? So that's the question. So I'm sure more than a few of you find yourself thinking about, especially if it's a recent or in the last year breakup, you keep thinking about the relationship. Now, many people even a ways out from a narcissistic relationship, and I think the more severe the relationship, the more you may do this, they find themselves continuing to think about the relationship. But maybe you're thinking about it in new ways, okay? So, for example, you may literally think back to an argument you had years ago, or about a sort of an odd behavior pattern that never made sense, or things they may have said about you or about your family or your work. But you may now find yourself thinking about this, but unpacking it in a new way, saying, oh my gosh, yeah, that was gaslighting, or oh, that was them baiting me, or oh, that was them getting supply by being charming in public. And then they were yelling me on the way home. Oh, that was the hot and cold. Oh, or that was them shaming me. That was projection, right? But then what might happen as you're sort of putting this whole puzzle together, you might get frustrated with yourself for going back there and still thinking about this relationship. This may even get more frothed up, for example. Let's say you're watching a movie or a TV show that has a narcissistic character or a narcissistic relationship, or maybe someone is sharing with you the story of their own narcissistic relationship. And in listening to that or watching that, it may take you back. You may even find yourself screaming at the TV or frustrated with someone who isn't getting at it. Like, don't you see you're being gaslighted or you're being manipulated? Because now you see it, right? And then you go back to your story, and it's almost like having a decoder ring, like, oh, that's that, and that's that. Now, so what I've heard some people wonder is like, Dr. Ramani, am I having flashbacks? Am I thinking about my old relationship because I'm not over this? Am I forever going to be stuck? And my answer is probably not, or not necessarily. In fact, it may not necessarily be a bad thing. Now, flashbacks are in fact trauma responses that can linger long after the trauma is over. Something in your environment will trigger them, usually something that was reminiscent of the original trauma. Flashbacks can also be really, really vivid. You might feel as though you're reliving it and having reactions within you like it's happening in current time. Some people, when they have flashbacks, might feel like they're seeing images. You might even be pulled in by other sensations like sounds or smells. You may feel bodily or somatic sensations that are similar to the trauma you experienced. Flashbacks might last a while, several minutes. Flashbacks may also only last a few seconds, but they can be very unsettling because for a moment, it's like you are experiencing or re-experiencing some or many aspects of the original trauma, and it will often jar you out of the situation that you are presently in. Now, flashbacks do sometimes happen. It's not typical, but flashbacks can sometimes happen for some survivors of narcissistic abuse, especially when it was long-term, chronic, and more severe narcissistic abuse. That's the sideline, because I want us to unpack this idea of going backwards, especially if something's reminding you of those patterns in your relationship and starting to understand patterns in your narcissistic relationship in a new way. I think more often that's not a flashback. It's something that we can call sort of contextualization. So when you were initially in your narcissistic relationship, okay, it was all self-blame and all confusion all the time. I'm sure at times it even felt surreal. It was like a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle with a lot of pieces missing, making it really frustrating, and you could never quite figure out the picture that you were putting together or whether the pieces fit together. However, I'd imagine since you're watching this channel, you're there. As you learned about narcissistic abuse and started having names for things and what patterns really are, and understanding how this personality style is organized and how it shows up in your relationships and what the narcissistic defenses are and what gaslighting is, it is literally like getting a decoder ring. Now the bizarre behavior at Thanksgiving 10 years ago makes perfect sense. So as you ruminate about the relationship, and you will ruminate, it's an absolutely guaranteed part of narcissistic abuse fallout. Part of it is taking that decoder ring and making sense of what happened to you. It's actually not such a bad thing, because in a way you're practicing identifying these dynamics in your story. And once you do that, you may actually be able to start lifting some of the blame because you can see these patterns in a different context. You just couldn't see them when they first happened on them. Now I'm going to say something silly here. I have an app on my phone, right? I can use it to take pictures of a leaf or a flower or a tree, and the app identifies the plant or the tree. For some reason, not knowing the names of plants and trees frustrated me. That's a me thing. Once I got the app, I actually find that I enjoy walks more. I just enjoy like being out in the world more, and I have a different way of describing the things around me. It relieved a strange tension in me because now I know that if that's a scrub oak tree or that's a sago palm or whatever, I like knowing that. So knowing what a scrub oak is very different from saying, I know, obviously it's a tree, but it's different, but it's similar to saying, oh, that was actually his insecurity, not my foolishness. Or, yeah, she did always throw a tantrum before important events for me, ruining it and leaving me even more insecure going in, which gave her the chance to soothe me and play the savior. Once you have the decoder ring, you're able to go back and make sense. It's like getting all those puzzle pieces back to finish the picture. But many survivors think that they're stuck, obsessing and ruminating and thinking it'll never get better. I keep thinking about it. I reassure them that actually, in many of these cases, they're just going back and decoding and decontextualizing the whole mess. It's like putting Post-its all over your old relationship. And this isn't actually a waste of time because it lets you flex a muscle so you may recognize these patterns more clearly in future people you meet. Stop blaming yourself. Stop self-gaslighting. And if the person is still in your life, have a better defense when that behavior rolls up again. Years later, many of us will look back and say, golly, I wish it made this much sense then. Yeah, you're right. Uncracking this code is like learning a second language, and it's probably something we should have learned in school, but alas, that is not the case. So there is a learning curve, as there always is when we're learning a new language. And once we learn this language, this formula, it helps us make sense of the past. And while it can feel like flashbacks, it's actually and hopefully a tool that we can use in the present and in the future. But I am going to say, as an aside, if you are indeed experiencing flashbacks from your narcissistic relationship, that is in fact a more pressing clinical issue that would require trauma-informed therapy to explore this issue and to help manage the distress these kinds of re-experiencing patterns and symptoms may cause. Let's take on an issue that happens for a lot of folks in these relationships, which is trying to figure out are you super empathic or are you just really, really vigilant? And most likely, you're probably both, so let's take that on. Empathy is a tough one. One of the best things about a person can really end up doing a number on you in a narcissistic relationship. Now, there is a lot of talk out there in the sphere of the internet about how people in narcissistic relationships are often empaths and very empathic, and some could even argue at times too empathic. And because of this, may get caught up in a never-ending loop of appeasing and soothing, making excuses and justifications for the narcissistic person's behavior. Some of these folks will recall a childhood spent being very attuned to their parents' needs, making sure their parent was okay, and soothed and appeased so the parent wouldn't get angry. Some of the ultra empathy that we witness in folks who get into narcissistic relationships do have their origins in childhood. A childhood where the child had to step into a role they should not have had to attune to and take care of the parents' needs, because that was the only way to stay safe and get attachment needs met. As adulthood came on, this excessive attunement and over-awareness of the needs and emotions of other people would manifest as a hyper-empathy. You know me, I'm all about empathy. Empathy is good. It's the lifeblood of healthy human relationships. But empathy has a lot of pieces to it. Self-awareness, emotional monitoring and regulation, consistency, awareness of the emotional states of other people, awareness of how our behavior impacts other people, caring about other people, And compassion is when that empathy translates into action. But like everything else in the world of psychology, it's on a continuum. And there can be too much of a good thing. To be very empathic can be tricky. It can mean subjugating your needs ahead of the needs of others, exhausting yourself trying to remain attuned all the time to other people and what they need and want, excessively monitoring yourself so you never say something wrong, and when you do, spending hours, days, or weeks ruminating about a misstep that you have made, that you might think you made socially. Empathy, sadly, puts a person at risk for getting stuck in a narcissistic relationship. Narcissistic people love empathic people because they can get away with so much with them. Empathic people make lots of justifications and then time passes, and then before you know it, the empathic person is firmly stuck. They may make excuses about the abyss of the narcissistic person's history, of their backstory, of their bad day, you name it. And it's also baked into the nature of the empathic person to be empathic, and they're more likely to become anxious, depressed, self-doubting, and self-blaming than the empathic person is to start seeing the situation clearly, because it is so at odds with their empathy to see a narcissistic relationship clearly. And the narcissistic relationship can evoke guilt and pity and a desire to fix and rescue and be better and make it better. But this creates a real challenge for a person who's very empathic, right? You think, I not only don't want to lose my empathy, I don't think I could. You probably can't and you don't want to. It's a good thing. But there is then the fear that because of that, you may fall back into another narcissistic relationship or get sucked back into the one you were already in. So when you get into something new, maybe a new relationship or friendship or workplace, what situation, you may find that you're really on edge. Being aware that you're an empathic person, but also not wanting to end up in another messy narcissistic relationship. It then begs the issue of whether you are going from being very empathic to experiencing this sense of hypervigilance. And hypervigilance is a sort of edge of your seat hyper-monitoring that we often observe in trauma survivors who are chronically on edge and very, very aware and vigilant and monitoring all that's happening around them. The right answer is probably both. The empathy is not going to go away. It's part of who you are. Though what can happen is that the empathic person feels more guilty or more numb after a narcissistic relationship, but you remain empathic. I have worked with many, many survivors who have really been through it, and their empathy just didn't go away. But what came in alongside it was this vigilance, this intense overfocus on making sure they weren't missing it, but also making sure people are okay. It makes sense that vigilance to the needs of other people is also a safety behavior. And it's a safety behavior that people who come up in narcissistic relationships often have. So what the hell are empathic people supposed to do? Slow down, slow way down. Have your smaller, trusted central core of people who you do trust and feel safe with. Your empathy is this gift that will get taken advantage of. So taking your time becomes important. Instead of that sort of edge of your seat vigilance, it becomes about taking it slow, remaining empathic, and also recognizing that it is okay to step away. This is a chronic crisis for empathic folks who feel that stepping away from someone who is behaving in an entitled, uncomfortable, invalidating, or manipulative way means that you're doing something that's not nice, that you're not doing the right thing, that you have to recognize that everyone's going through something, and maybe that because of that, you can just give them a chance. You can give them a chance by taking it very, very, very slow. And if they pressure you to step up the pace or intensify the relationship, you can say, it's hard, but you can say that slow is what works.
And they may just get frustrated and walk away. They may also try to bully you and bring you to their side of thinking, but you want to be resistant. The high levels of empathy in a narcissistic relationship often do morph into vigilance as you try to get it right, chronically monitor the narcissistic person's needs. And then in future relationships, you may find yourself stuck between empathy and vigilance. Many empathic people feel exhausted after narcissistic relationships, feeling that they can't turn their empathy off, but are afraid of being played again, so they may isolate. Being more careful isn't a bad thing, but it's important to not overcorrect either and cut yourself off from the world and the possibility of other human relationships. Narcissistic relationships are a place where your empathy becomes exhausting and make it impossible to cut away without feeling sick. It can happen, but it takes a minute, and it can mean the rumination and fear of whether you hurt the narcissist can dog you for a long time. Your empathy is a gift, and the gift carries an opportunity cost in narcissistic relationships. But save that gift for the people who will reciprocate and treasure it, and give your nervous system a break, because you can't stay vigilant forever.
So let's talk about the difficulties with concentration that are often observed in people experiencing narcissistic abuse. Anyone who is in any form of a relationship with a narcissist, whether it's family, work, or personal relationship, will tell you that they do have difficulty concentrating, especially at times when things are more difficult than the usual difficult in their relationship. Some of this connects to what we've already talked about, which is rumination. You get stuck in your head about your narcissistic situation and you can't let it go. So obviously that makes it difficult to pay attention to other things. Anything that's intrusive makes it hard to concentrate. But it goes beyond just the rumination generated by the narcissistic relationships. Narcissistic relationships are also quite disruptive. It's like living with a crying infant, except the difference is that the infant is innocent, sweet, and can likely be soothed. With the narcissist in your life, they can be intrusive, insistent, interrupting you all the time, sending you lots of texts, calling you, making noise, and not caring that anything that they're doing is disruptive. Again, that lack of empathy. In some ways, they interrupt your concentration just by their existence and their behavior, and that has nothing to do even with what's going on in your head. It's just them making noise in the environment. The narcissistic relationship is an unsolvable problem, and in that way, it can be mentally intrusive as well. You try to think of solutions to this unsolvable problem or things to say, and you keep getting disrupted by the idea that there's nothing that you can do. Because the narcissistic relationship in your life is absolutely not an enhancement to your life, it's far more likely to be a disruption in your life, it absolutely makes your ability to focus really, really problematic. Keep in mind that because of their lack of empathy, their lack of self-awareness, their lack of self-reflective capacity, they don't really care that they're disrupting you. And if you tell them or ask them nicely, could you please stop? Or ask them to consider other people with the noise they're making, you're then likely to face even more disruption because now they're yelling at you or angry at you. And then you're going to have more difficulties with concentration because now you're even more angry about the situation. It always feels like a double bind catch-22. Now, if you grew up in a narcissistic family, you know that these challenges with concentration may have been enough to cause you difficulty in school or other kinds of school-like activities. In fact, someone may have even wondered if you have attention deficit disorder, instead of wondering if you growing up in an invalidating, gaslighting nightmare was actually the real issue. No, they make it about you. There is such a heavy unhappiness that accompanies coming from a narcissistic family. Kids from these families can feel confused and ashamed, and these feelings can preoccupy them during the school day and when it's time to do their homework. And because children from narcissistic families rarely hear any words of encouragement, the main activity of childhood that does require any attention from any child, which is really school, often suffers as a result. The stakes can be high for school while the child is in school. Some children may believe that if they do really well at school, that they'll get positive regard from their oh so conditionally loving narcissistic parent, and so then they may be ultra focused on doing well in school. But they get distracted by how high the stakes are. If I get an A on my math test, my dad's gonna love me. Most of the other kids in the classroom didn't have to do that calculation on their math test. These preoccupations can distract you into adulthood, college, workplace settings, and then if you should enter another narcissistic relationship, the concentration difficulties may begin again. If you work in a toxic workplace, concentration can be a real struggle. At some level, you are always distracted by your difficult supervisor or your difficult toxic coworker, or just by the toxic overall setting or culture. And that may make you less productive. And hey, word to all of the difficult toxic workplaces out there, instead of verbally abusing your employees for not being productive, if you just made the workplace less toxic, y'all would get a lot more positive results from your employees. Having to monitor your environment for harm, for threats, and the constant need to appease the narcissist is also preoccupying and distracting and can impede your concentration. You can see how this may have started in childhood, always monitoring to make sure mom or dad wouldn't fly into a rage. And then it may evolve into adulthood, appeasing the difficult, malcontented spouse, or ensuring that your toxic boss is adequately enabled so they can get through the day. I have had a few clients tell me that they felt like they had narc brain. And by that, they meant that they felt like they had trouble remembering stuff, tracking conversations, paying attention, focusing on details. It makes sense. We actually see similar patterns in people with post-traumatic stress symptoms, the constant environmental monitoring and hypervigilance. That sympathetic nervous system activation, the fight, flight, and freeze that you pretty regularly live in while you're in a narcissistic relationship, puts a lot of wear and tear on all of your systems and simply makes it more difficult to think and pay attention and obviously concentrate. So what are you supposed to do if you have all these problems with concentration? Number one, if you can't get out of this relationship, then at a minimum, please start by no longer multitasking. Do one thing at a time. Multitasking actually doesn't work for any of us on a good day, but with the preoccupation of a narcissistic relationship, it becomes really important to just focus on one thing at a time, so you will be less likely to get distracted, and that your problems and struggles with concentration will be less likely to lead to mistakes. Number two, I want you to practice mindfulness. Learn for a little bit of time each day to stay in the moment in front of you, even when you're not doing anything. Mindfulness pays tremendous dividends and allows you to have better concentration when you actually are doing something and something important. It's like a muscle you flex, and then you can use it when you need it. The third thing I want you to do is I want you to create workarounds. The narcissist is a big impediment, like a massive boulder in the middle of your living room that you need to work around. Wake up earlier, stay up later, find a quiet place in the house, even if it's in the bathroom, if that's where you need to go to get something done. Narcissists are never going to stop intruding and interrupting. You may need to do the workaround to find quieter spaces and times. Number four, get organized. While being organized is not necessarily a substitute for concentration, it can eliminate some distractions, and it may leave you feeling less chaotic, which is so much of how people feel in narcissistic relationships. Number 5, you know it's coming. Therapy. You know what I'm going to say. Therapy becomes a place to offload some of the most difficult emotions and thoughts, to just clear your mind out a little so you can concentrate. A lot of people come into therapy, dump it all out, and say, all right, I feel a little more clear now. A narcissistic relationship is difficult enough. Lack of concentration is a common pattern in those surviving narcissistic abuse, and it can leave you feeling more out of it than the relationship already does. Again, this sort of constant feeling like you're in a cloud and can't pay attention to anything can definitely take a toll on you in school, at work, and in other things that matter to you, including parenting. It's a commonplace pattern. It's also a pattern we see in other mental health issues like depression. So if you're experiencing both of those things at the same time, narcissistic abuse and depression, the concentration problems are going to be really, really tough for you. But be kind to yourself, be gentle to yourself. And honestly, sometimes just when you get rid of that relationship, you're going to notice that after a period of healing, your concentration's going to be just fine. Thanks again for tuning in. As always, come join us, subscribe, hit the bell, get the notifications, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye.